So today we are working in my book called Acts, the Jerusalem Church, which is on Acts chapters 1 through 5. And today we are going to be on chapter 3, which is the day of Pentecost. And so, right there. Okay, Acts 2, 1 through 13. Let me give you a little preview. This book studies the first 5 chapters of the book of Acts, when the Jerusalem Christian church first started. The book of Acts starts, in a sense, with an ending. The first part of chapter 1 has to do with the ascension of Jesus. As that event draws near, Jesus tells his disciples several things. First, they were to stay in Jerusalem for the promise of the Father, which we know is the Holy Spirit. Second, when the Holy Spirit comes, that they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, and throughout the ends of the earth. And lastly, that the restoration of the kingdom of Israel is not now. Thank goodness the 2 men dressed in white, angels, appeared when Jesus ascended to tell the disciples, in essence, to move along and get on with the ministry, as I think they would still be standing there waiting for instruction from someone for a very long time. They went back to the upper room from the Mount of Olives and prayed. While they were waiting for the arrival of the Holy Spirit, Peter decides that they need to replace Judas Iscariot, the 12th apostle, with another member of the group of disciples. Since the rest of the apostles were in agreement, they set up the requirements. This man had to have been with them since the beginning of Jesus's ministry, the time of Jesus's baptism. The group proposed 2 men who fit this quality: Joseph, also known as Barsabas, and Matthias. The apostles prayed over these 2 men and then cast lots to see which one God wanted. Matthias was the one chosen. Although he's probably with the apostles throughout their future ministry, this is the last time we hear of him specifically. So now I'm ready.
Okay, Act 2:1. When the day of Pentecost had fully come, they were all with one according in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of rushing wind, mighty wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. Then there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and one sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began speaking with other tongues as the Spirit gave their utterance.
Right. So many things to do with this, I had to make a separate page. Pentecost was 50 days after Resurrection Day, 10 days after the ascension of Jesus. It started the Feast of Weeks and commemorated the giving of the 10 Commandments of the Mount Sinai. The Feast of Weeks would celebrate the first fruits of the harvest. Who was gathered together in one place?
All the prophets.
And the disciples, and all the apostles and disciples, right? How is the sound they heard described?
As a rushing mighty wind.
Right. And what did they see?
Divided tongues as a fire.
Yeah. Was it an actual fire or what looked like fire?
What looked like fire.
Yeah. What happened to each one present?
They were filled with the Holy Spirit.
What was the result of what happened to them?
They began to speak in tongues.
Right. Who gave them this ability?
The Spirit.
Right. This is a fulfillment of what Jesus promised his disciples, which go ahead and read.
John 16:7-8. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I depart, I will send him to you. And when he has come, he will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment.
Right. I mean, basically, as much as great as it is that Jesus was there in person, he could only be in one place at one time, where the Holy Spirit can be in many places. So in many ways, the Holy Spirit's work is a lot harder than Jesus's work. According to the verse above, what's another name for the Holy Spirit?
I put Jesus.
Well, no, actually helper.
Helper. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same word that's used when we are created for Adam, an helpmate. It's interesting. What is the helper going to convict the world of?
Sin, righteousness, and judgment.
Yeah, and also reread Acts 1 through 8 regarding what Jesus promised to send, just as an addition.
Acts 2:5, and there were dwelling in the Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when the sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language.
Right. And yes, heard him speak in his own language. In Pentecost, there's a difference to the speaking of tongues that we know later. Pentecost, they were speaking in the various tongues of the people listening. And that is a version of tongues. And that happens even today. I've heard stories of people going to foreign countries and sitting in on a sermon and wondering why they're doing it in English. Yet when they go up to talk to the pastor speaks in the foreign language and doesn't understand English. It's because they heard it in English. So it
Oh,
happens even today.
huh.
Why were there Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven in Jerusalem?
Um, Wait a minute. There it is. Okay. That they could understand in their own. No, where am I
Number one,
at?
why were there Jews, devout men from
Oh,
every
okay.
nation?
I was on the right page.
Okay, no problem.
Uh, Jer- they were in Jerusalem for Pentecost.
Right, for Pentecost, which, there's several festivals that all men, Jewish men, need to come to Jerusalem for. What sound or sounds did they hear?
Rushing wind and speaking in tongues.
Yeah, the speaking in tongues. Yeah. Um, what was the multitude confused about?
That they could hear them speak in his own language.
Right. Since the Jews came to Jerusalem from many countries, they expected to hear Greek, the common language of the day, or Hebrew, both the language of the Torah and the synagogue. So, why did God have the apostles speak in native tongues of the people in the crowd?
He wanted them to hear his words as they spoke and as they were spoken in their language. He wanted to make sure that they could understand.
Right. And not only that, it also makes an attention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm hearing my own language. I'm hearing French, or whatever, let's go see what's going on. Each of the persons in the multitude heard their own language. How did they know other languages were also spoken?
Because when the others spoke, they couldn't understand it.
Right. Yeah. So as they looked around, they realized that, they might even talk to each other. I hear this in my Egyptian language, but no, they're talking Syrian. So yeah.
Acts 2:7. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, "Look, are not all these speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own tongue in which we were born? Parthians, Medias, Elamites, dwelling in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya adjoining Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jewish and proselytes, Cretans, and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our tongue the wonderful works of God."
Right. And this kind of points out to the fact that there was what's called the Jewish diaspora, where they moved all to various countries all around them, and they're all coming in, and those are all the countries that they're talking about here, all coming into Jerusalem for the Pentecost.
Acts 2:12. So they were all amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "Whatever could this mean?" Others mocked, saying, "They are full of new wine."
Well, because you hear your language, but you don't hear anything else, and it sounds like a state of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
What were the people of the multitude amazed and perplexed about?
That they could understand their own tongues,
Yeah. And what topic were the apostles speaking about in all different languages?
the wonderful works of God.
Right. Did the people of the multitude know where the apostles were from?
They said they called them Galileans, so they thought they were from Galilee.
Yeah, and most of them were John and Peter, James, Andrew, John, and then you have Matthew was from Capernaum, and you have a number of them that are from Galilee, and maybe all of them are. And the reason why they knew that is because of the accent they had. What did the mockers of what the multitude was hearing say?
They believed they were drunk on wine.
If the multitude all heard the words of the apostles in their own language on a topic they had already come to Jerusalem to hear, why would some think the apostles were drunk?
Because some of it, when they hear them and they don't understand what some of the prophets were saying, to them it probably sounded like baby babble,
Right. Yeah.
slurred, and they couldn't grasp what it was.
Right. Yeah. 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 So now we come to the crossword. No worries. The next chapter is really huge. Okay. 3. When this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were
Confused.
confused. Number 4. Look, are not all these who speak?
Galileans.
Right. 5. Others mocked and said they are full of new
Wine.
6. They were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in
Tongues.
And 9. The sound from heaven sounded like a rushing mighty
Wind.
And 10. Then there appeared to them divided tongues as of
Fire.
one down, because everyone heard them speak in his own
Language.
2. All this happened on what special day?
Pentecost.
And 7. They were all filled with the Holy
Spirit.
8. We hear them speaking in our own tongues, the wonderful works of
God.
Right. So there are different versions of tongues because they're in the new church as we go through Acts. We're going to have the gift of tongues is very prevalent. It's almost an indication that the Holy Spirit comes upon them. And yet we don't have that gift as strongly this now. You have it in your church, of course, and there are churches that allow it to be. And I do think it exists, but I think a lot of other churches don't have it because they tamp down on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean they're any less so, that they just feel uncomfortable with it. Thank goodness we have different churches that we can go to for our comfortability level, you know. But I do believe in tongues. I speak in tongues, but not like that. I don't know why, but when I get frustrated, I speak in tongues. So obviously it's not the language of tongues. So I have no idea what it is that I'm speaking when I get frustrated, but Terry will just laugh and go, what are you saying now? And I said, I have no idea. Which is the other reason why it's not tongues, because obviously if you're speaking in tongues, you should have an interpreter or someone who can understand it.
Yeah.
Now, speaking in tongues also had to do with it isn't like and you can tell me if you've seen it differently, but basically it's about the wonderful works of God. Usually the speaking in tongues is that. It's not, well, you're going to meet your boyfriend tomorrow or something, not like that. It's more about the wonderful works of God. It's an acclamation of God and maybe what's about to happen in God's world. But that's my understanding. You see it more often. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, I do. It's very prevalent in our church. And I mean, the first time it happened to me, I was just praying and the words, it just poured out of me. And it kind of shocked me at first, and I kind of bit my lip.
Yeah.
Because I was like, what?
Yeah. And some people actually call it, Paul once said, the tongue of angels. And, there may be very well an understanding of that language is in us in heaven, these things. So there's 2 types of tongues, and one is the type that's at Pentecost, where it's other languages, understanding. Either the person is speaking it or the person listening hears it. Both is part of this type of tongues. The other type of tongues is, as you say, it's saying the wonderful works of God, in which case we have an interpreter that says that. Now, Calvary Chapel is a little different than your Assembly of God in the fact that they don't usually feel tongues will interrupt a preaching, whereas Assembly of God will allow tongues to interrupt, if I understand that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, and whereas Calvary Chapel feels like God would not interrupt God, but you know,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's the
they
only
let us,
difference.
they don't frown upon it, and we also have people that just get so filled with the Holy Spirit, they will start to prophesize, and
Mhm.
they do it right in the middle of it.
Right, and we've gone to a couple of Assembly of God's. Terry spoke at one recently, and the God's proclamation and these things. I think there's a lot to it, but it's a scary concept because we doubt everything anymore. So, yeah. But anyway, I allowed all that to be on the recording because I think it was important. And I'm going to start recording now.